like when you think about it, when people say, if there's a need, why doesn't the community come, right? Why doesn't the community seek services?
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't identify with the people who they see there, or they don't have a cultural component they can relate to, right? So doing this kind of part of rebranding, doing Dia de los Muertos, or bringing more cultural events to the community, I think brings them out, or kind of they see us like them, like a part of the community, right?
Yeah. It's the first step, I think, to creating actual change, is finding a common ground with the people that are, the decision makers of the community. So if they feel like they're not even being represented, how could they go in for an ask?
Yeah.
And we don't even ask each other.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot, or part of what we've been doing here. Like quite frankly, part of my conversation was the reason why I joined the department, because I used to work for a contractor, was Service Area 7. It's the community. My mom was an illegal immigrant, so was my dad. I was born here, but there's a huge need, and if we could support it in any way, it would be awesome. But a lot was I seen this guy, he had a lot of good ideas and the potential. I was like, I'm down. If I can be a part of that in any way, let's make it happen,
Yeah.
And so honestly, I tell him too, a lot of these things happened because he supported the idea. Sometimes they are my wacky ideas, Evelyn will tell you, I have a lot of ideas. But if they don't, how would I say, if he wouldn't support them, it wouldn't happen,
But it goes beyond that. I think it's what we're trying to do is listen to the community.
Yeah.
That's what, to me, I'm more I don't have a problem with advocating for that. In fact, it pushes me to fight harder for it, because if the community is actually embracing it and they're asking for it, then it's okay, let's do this, And I was just sharing with one of our department leaders about the mural outside. I don't know if you saw it when you were coming in. I kid you not, every time I'm here, at least one community member, whether it's a client or a family member, will come up and just say, that is beautiful, I love that.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of that was the point, right?
Yes.
We wanted to do something that was for the community, that was welcoming, right? That would give people a little sense of hope and feel okay, I'm at the right place.
Yes.
Whereas you go to any of our other clinics and
Take a blank wall.
this is what you get. Yeah, it's a very sterile environment. And it's kind of we need to get out of that. We need to start doing things differently, but it has to come with support from the community, and that's the biggest thing. So it's a lot of the stuff that they do with the Peer Resource Center, they literally walk the streets. They walk with the community, and whatever they bring up as an idea to do, Jaime will come to me and is hey, so somebody came up with this suggestion and we're thinking about doing a group, what do you think? And I'm makes sense. Do you have a location, who you're going to be working with, how you're going to market it? He's we're working on that. Run with it. Go. Do it, And that's kind of what we've been trying to do. But even then, it's still pulling teeth with the community.
You have to present it in a way
Oh yeah.
to fit the norm of what the process has been for years.
Yeah.
And
But that's kind of also why we make it a point to try and, invite guests like yourself, who are really you're from the community, you're from this community, the community knows you, they respect you, and last month was it when we did the one with Eddie, right? It was the same, it's he's somebody who's well known in the community, he's from this community, and it's not just people that are from within our department that we know, because it's well, we don't need to present to each other anymore, we need to get this, let the community know that we're here, that there's support. Just because you come to a mental health facility for services doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you.
Exactly.
If anything, that means there's a certain strength that it takes to have to do to get to that point where you're asking for help. So
absolutely.
we're trying.
Yeah.
We're definitely trying.
And I would say, like you said, in the inception of the podcast, everything started little, like I was sharing with you. We started on Teams, then the iPhones. But it was part of the development and part of the growth of where we are now, right? Now having guests like yourself here.
Phones.
Yeah,
Those episodes.
Hey, we were all getting used or comfortable to
having to coordinate the audio. It's okay, every time you talk, you have to mute yourself, because if not, there's an echo.
Hey, as a Latino, I don't know about you all, but as a Latino, I was brought up you work with what you have.
Yes,
and
you work.
You get the tape, you get the duct tape, anything works with duct tape, right? So I think at one point he'll tell you, I had a little tripod and we had the two iPhones wired up and they were like back to back or at a weird angle. I had a whole setup going on, but long story short, I think part of the growth of the podcast has been like actually then sticking to what we're going to bring to the community, which is guests like yourself, what Manny was sharing, right? We have a lot of Latino young ladies who need guidance, who need to have strong role models or someone to look up to, right? And you know, being that today is International Women's Day and it's March, everybody, I think it was awesome when Evelyn told me, hey, I think I know somebody. By the way, everybody, that's Evelyn right there, the quiet one.
Yes.
But
it's her fault I'm here.
no.
Well, because she's usually behind the scenes, and now she's
I know.
front and center.
But I think it's great. I think like leading by example, like having Eddie here, he was a great advocate. It was a great episode with him. Having you here now, I think it's gonna be awesome for just our community to be able to hear and see. You know, it's not just us talking all the time or us talking shop or business, but definitely addressing some of those concerns or issues in relation to, you know, seeking services, the stigma with Latinos. You know, again, I'm not brown by accident. I mean, really, there's a lot of stigma out there, you know, and even still now, when you approach certain community members, like I always tell the boss, I hide my badge or we hide our badge because they'll be like, "Hey, are you immigration?" No, not. But yeah. So it's
that's very real though, and there's so much talk around just like, oh, you just have to have a positive mindset and blah blah blah, and I'm just like, if someone's fearing deportation, that's life changing, and doesn't matter how positive I think, you know what I mean? So those are very real consequences to people's lives that are often overlooked, and I'm like, no, you have to meet people where they're at.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
And definitely kind of being a voice in terms of sharing that with the community, with the larger audience, trying to get them to understand, right? Again, I was born here, but I remember as a kid, my mom or my dad, my uncles, right? Just family in general, they really had that real fear. It was like, I think in that time, they were having like those raids where they would hit different workplaces. And so that must have been horrible.
Well,
I can't imagine.
We're not that far off from that, not that long ago. We had ICE right in our parking lot at San Antonio setting up to,
No way.
Yeah, they were right in the parking lot setting up to do raids.
Oh, wow.
And we were struggling with that because a lot of our consumers were they were missing their appointments. They were coming up, seeing, and then leaving. And we had to pivot. We had to see how we were still, because we don't want our consumers to go without services. So we had to, we need to turn field based. So everybody out, go meet them, go see them at their homes, where they're at their schools, because so it's not that far off. It still happens. It still happens.
So I think to be able to, you know, kind of, I mean, for me, I say this all the time, but it's a really big deal to be able to have a platform, to be able to communicate to the community, to let them know we're here, to present ourselves in a different light, to let them know that we're going to be there to support them, right, in any way we can. And then again, to have you here, Gabriela, it's a great honor to meet you. Even though I've met you before, but I'm going to pretend we haven't met.
I haven't met this version.
I'm going to edit that out.
Different character.
It'd be cool if you could share with us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got started, and not with us, with the community.
Oh, for sure. Well, thank you for having me here, Evelyn. Thank you for inviting me. I'm from Baldwin Park, California. My parents are from Zacatecas and Jalisco, Mexico. But Baldwin Park is a predominantly Hispanic community. I think it's like 80%, and then the rest is Asian, and then other, you know, demographic. But growing up in Baldwin Park, it felt very like home. I would go to Vallarta and it was like Ramon Ayala playing, you know what I mean? Like it didn't feel too far off from what I was experiencing at home. But I did end up going to UCLA, and once I got there, I was like, oh.
Culture shock.
I'm like, just kidding. I don't know what's going on. And it was, I think it was more of a mental process than anything else, because in Baldwin Park, I was like, okay, I'm smart. Like, I'm like book smart. I don't know about common sense, but the book smart is there. Once I got to UCLA, I was like, someone's playing a prank on me. Like, this is not even real, because for the first time in my life, like, I failed a class, and I was like, Imagine never having experienced first world problems, right?
Yeah.
But it reflects back to you something that you're not used to seeing of yourself. And then it started like the whole like, why am I even here? Like, and then I go back home and it's like a total disconnect of there's no perception, like common ground perception. Because my mom, the first thing she did was like, oh, did you see so-and-so's son que también va a la UCLA, you know? And I was like, girl, there's like 40,000 people on campus. Like, you know what I mean? Like, she must have thought it was like a small campus where I could just run into like her homegirl son. And I was like, okay, she does not know like what's going on in my daily life. And so that experience became very lonely. And navigating that for 3 years and then realizing like, oh, I'm not going to become a doctor because I'm not good at chemistry. So what am I actually going to do with my life? Because...
So you were shooting to be a medical doctor?
Yeah, I was supposed to be. I laugh at it now. But
Yeah.
I was like, okay, what's the highest paying job in the US? I Googled it and it said radiologist. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be a radiologist. That's literally how I decided what I was going to do with my life.
Yeah, yeah.
And I took my first chemistry class. I'm like, that's not happening. But what's wild is that's part of the narrative, right? De que yo vine, ¿es lo que speak Spanish?
Oh yeah, of course.
Like, yo vine a este país para que ustedes tuvieran una opción de vida diferente, para que tuvieran mejor trabajo. Like, I get all that. And it's not like they're telling you straight up, like, this is the guilt and shame and like the pressure I'm putting on. But it's the subliminal messaging that's like ingrained in your brain. And it's such a heavy load to carry. But at the same time, they have no way of helping you in that push they're giving. They're just like, que Dios te bendiga, and you're just like, okay.
Well, especially if they didn't have that in their background, right?
And they don't.
Yeah.
I mean, they had the courage of leaving their home to come to this country, right? But they're showing up to a place that is foreign to them. The language isn't there. And so when it came to just applying for FAFSA, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to jail after this. Like, for sure I did it wrong. You know, and they're just like lost in the same like way as I was. A veces al revés, I would help them fill out stuff.
Yeah.
And I know that that's the same experience for a lot of us. And so it's such a... And speaking of mental health, like when I think about it, you know, now that I'm on this side of the experience, having gone through that, and I went down the mental health route myself. I graduated with a degree in sociology. A couple years later, I went back to school, got my master's in social work, and I've been doing it for 8 years now. And so the amount of times I've worked with people from our community and they express the same story, and I'm just like, it's a pattern, like there's something happening here. And I understand very differently, you know, what I experienced as a daughter of immigrant parents and just trying to like cope with all of that at the same time as like releasing any like resentment, or you know, you didn't really get to be a child because you had to parent your parents at some point. So it's a lot. Like if you really look at the first gen experience, it's like a recipe for mental illness, because there's so many things that we're constantly juggling at the same time while just trying to survive. And I'm just like,
so I have a question for you. I have a question for you, legit question. Where does Evelyn come in all this mix? Because a little birdie told me that you guys kind of knew each other, right?
Yes.
You guys grew up together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Evelyn and I, first of all, I think we played basketball together. That's like the earliest memory I have of her. I want to say middle school, like 7th or 8th grade. And I ended up being with her class. We were class of 2010.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for a while. So I was always involved in like school politics and stuff, like leadership, and siempre fui esa niña enfadosa. I was super focused in school, and now I can tell you that it's a trauma response to what was happening at home, and a lot of that is translated into our communities, but we applaud overachievement, you know. And so having her as a friend, as someone that I played basketball with, and we kept in touch through social media over the years. And I opened a coffee shop, a food business that is now able to provide catering services. So she hit me up, and I was like, oh yeah, I could do that. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. Like, here we are coming back
Full
to
circle.
yeah. So it's really nice that, you know, we are able to connect as women, as people who grew up together, and then now working in the mental health industry. Una por un lado, otra por el otro, and it's that's how we're here.
No, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
She shared with me actually that she knew you, and I'm glad she reached out to you because we were scrambling to have these events, and she's like, "Hey, I think I know a vendor," and I'm like, "Really?" I'm like, "Oh." So she's a lifesaver. She'll tell you. Lately, I've been relying on her for so much that it's just.
No, she's great.
Yeah, she's awesome. But I'm really glad to hear about your background and all those things that you've gone through and you've observed, and you know, as a Latino, I can agree that some of those things, unfortunately, you know, it's the way it is. And I hate using that term, but it really is. And sometimes, you know, when you're inside the box, you can't see outside the box. It takes an outsider to show you or to see, like what you were sharing about your mom. I had a lot of similar experience with my parents. And I think generationally, we all go through that in one sense or another. I almost feel like, for me, right, and I'm going to be 46 in April. It's cool. I'm not worried about it. But my point is that it's almost like a blessing if your parents were able to have a higher education.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if not, like coming from the inner city, and I shared this before, my brother used to say to me, you know you're not a statistic, right? And I'd be like, what are you talking about? But now I understood what he meant, right? It takes a lot. It takes a lot to pull it up, to go to college, to get a higher education, to become an entrepreneur.
Oh my God, yeah.
A lot of people say things like, you know, when I grow up, I'm going to do this. And then you see them 10 years later and you're like, bro,
Wow.
it's true.
Yeah.
So that's really awesome.
I mean, that's the part that I think affects most people in the world. It's the narrative we told ourselves growing up. I was supposed to be here by this age, and I was supposed to, and then society does a great job of reminding you too.
Yeah.
Like if you haven't had kids by a certain age, women get that a lot. A ver a qué horas, you know, se te está yendo el tren. And it's like, have you seen this economy? Like, you know, like let's keep it 100 here. And those are the things that usually make us, you know, suffer because we have this expectation of ourselves that is really, these things are really difficult to attain if you don't have generational support.
Yes.
I mean, I have my own home because I have such a strong support system, and then these people made choices that enabled that for me. But I'm not going to stand here and say like, oh, I have my own home, y tú no. You know what I mean? But there's a lot of that, and people highlight those things so the rest of the people watching that haven't been able to then reflect and feel bad about it themselves.
And not to, I'm always a jokester, right? But like, not to, bless my mom, right? But like, my mom made it very easy for me to overachieve. My mom, you know, she worked in a sweatshop most of her life. She worked at a warehouse. I worked with her at a workhouse at one point. So for me, it was very easy to overachieve. I graduated from high school. Mi hijo es el presidente del mundo. You know how that is, right?
It's a manager.
Yeah. And I was even sharing with my wife the other day. I'm like, you know, I realized that I'm one of the group who graduated from high school. She starts laughing, and I'm like, I passed that test, you know. But it is. It's part of that stigma. And it's part of that pressure that culturally, as Latinos or people of color, we grow up with those things, right? And you don't realize it. Like me, again, I grew up in South Central LA. And again, in one of my conversations with myself, I was like, geez, it's tough out there.
Yeah.
It ain't a joke.
I think about that a lot too because having had the privilege of being at a university, I started taking classes that allowed me to reflect back just on what I was experiencing. Because I took sociology when I was in high school as like a form of graduating early because overachieving kid. But then I ended up really liking it in college, and I didn't know like you can make a career of that because most people are like, what are you going to do with the sociology degree? And I'm just like, that's a whole other episode, but I can tell you what to do with that. But just taking those classes allowed me to be like, oh, like there's a name to what I had already been thinking about my experiences. So I was able to like separate, for example, my father from just being my dad to being his own person. And started looking at his life experiences, and he didn't get to graduate high school. He had to go work to, you know, support. And so then you start thinking about it in that way, and you start releasing the sense of like, why didn't you, we do a lot of that in our community. So that was very healing. But if I didn't have the opportunity to take those classes because of the choices they made, it's all connected.
It is. Recently, there's a quote that I've been sharing recently, and for those who know will know, but I've been saying recently, the universe is as it should be. I saw this movie, long story short, the character was really stressed, and the other character told him, the universe is as it should be. Why are you so stressed, right? And I guess I'm a big believer in everything happens for a reason, and there's no such thing as coincidences, right? But I think you're absolutely right. I think it takes for us to explore all these things in retrospect, go back and see why my mom or my dad were the way they were. What were the circumstances in their life that made them be that way? A lot of times people like to say things like, oh, so-and-so, he's this, or that person is that.
Relabel them.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it isn't that simple. Life is a lot more complicated and very, very, how would I say, there's multiple layers, right?
Yeah, multidimensional for sure.
Definitely. Don't get me started on that. Don't get me started on that. But
No.
I would like to invite some of our silent partners to speak.
Same.
Because I feel like we've been carrying this conversation.
I'm just enjoying the conversation. I'm getting all in.
No, it's cool, but to me it's really impressive to hear of everything you've done, and I think, so I'm a father. I have my little girl, she's 4, and to me, to have positive role models who are like us, who look like community members, right? Who she can identify with. I think that's awesome, because often part of like the cultural stigma también, right, is like, for example, I was talking about this last time, is as a man, culturally, as a Latino man, there's a lot that's put on your shoulders too. What do you mean you're gonna go to school? You gotta work, because you gotta have a family. And like with the whole having children thing, right? Not I got made fun of, but like, why'd you wait so long? A lot of my friends have older kids, right? And they're like, why'd you wait so long? Like, or even my wife, right? Se te va a ir el tren. What are you waiting for? But it's like, I think we chose to make those, we chose those choices for ourselves.
We planned it.
We kind of wanted to stay away, not that it's a bad thing, but stay away from that common routine or cycle, right? You have your kids young, there's nothing wrong with that, but then you're stuck to whatever it is you have to do. And it's very complicated, like I said, it's different for everybody, but I think for me and my wife, we chose that path. Like,
it works for you guys, and I think that's where that takes emotional awareness and intelligence.
Thank you.
Yes.
Did
You
you
didn't
hear
even
that?
know you were emotionally intelligent.
I had no idea what that meant until you said it.
No,
Wait, hold on.
yes.
Pat yourself on the back.
Give yourself your flowers. It's true, and most of us, I tell this to people all the time. First of all, you don't have your full brain until you're 25.
Yes.
Yeah.
Your frontal temporal lobe, which is the decision-making part of your brain, ain't there until you're 25. I had 2 kids and I was already married by then.
Yeah.
Like, I was really out here making those choices in the dark.
Yeah.
And it's hard.
But that was my path, right? And it's just, it becomes a thing of like, people are very vocal about their opinions, and that's where it's the problem, like we're all individually supposed to choose what works for us, but then your neighbor turns around and is like, oh no, like mi hijo este lo otro. They use their children as like pawns for like, oh, this I raised them, they did so, and it's so crazy to me, because I'm like, what about when we mess up, huh?
Yeah. Well, so my wife and I do this thing.
We don't talk about the kid that's in jail right now.
Let's talk about all of them.
What about your other son? Which one? What are you talking about? Like,
We don't talk about Bruno.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, me and my wife do this thing like when my daughter does something like that I like, I'm like, that's my little girl. And then when she does something that we don't like, she's, that's your daughter. But I totally feel that, and I get you. Like even again, like going back to the mental health aspect of the community and the mental health needs for women. I think a lot of times people don't understand how complex and how hardcore that is for individuals, right?
Yeah.
Like being able to break the stigma, to get more women to speak out, to seek services. I know, like Manny said, we have a men's group that we facilitate, and we're surprised that we get people to attend because Latino men are Latino men,
Yeah.
and their stigma that they have built up about mental health services or just seeking support in general is intense, right?
But it goes
Yeah.
beyond that. It's not just Latino men. It's just men in general.
Men in
correct?
general.
I mean,
Men in general, and it's so like frustrating to see how systematically it's the suppression of your emotions at the core.
Yeah.
Suppressed emotions become anger, suppressed anger becomes violence. And you look at the statistics and it's like the population that's homeless is the majority is men. Population that's incarcerated, the majority is men. And I link it back to cultural like upbringing and it's the suppression of emotions. Like that's step one. But it's like the men are being raised in this culture, but I have a son and he's the oldest and I'm like, I need to raise a man that can let the emotions run and learn how to manage them.
Yeah.
Because if I don't sit and like talk to him for 2 hours, even though it's giving me gray hairs, I would much rather lose my sleep right now that he's still in my home than to know that he's out here in these streets catching charges or something.
Yeah.
You know, like that's very real to me. That's also why I chose to just have 2 children. And I was like, that's all the mental capacity I have. Like, and antes, God sent them because they were planned and they already know this.
Yeah.
But again, I was making these decisions in the dark,
Yeah.
you know, before I had awareness. But now that I do, it's like, okay, so how can I like decrease that cycle of the suppression of the emotions in the family? Because I see how much my own family members struggle with it. My husband and how he's grown so much, you know, and it's just generational. And I feel like even men need that like support from each other, but also if we have women raising them, it's a collaborative effort. It's because I've seen like the women with internalized misogyny that continue the cycles, and I'm like, we're not helping anyone.
Well,
You're
like,
not.
I've shared on the podcast before, like, so before I was a dad, you know, just a guy with my lady, we've been together forever. And I remember the look of stress I had. I'm sure I know Manny could read it off of my face because he would always tell me, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, right? But my point that I was going to get to is that
I had to put my crisis intervention hat
Oh,
on. When he first all like, guess what? I'm like, what? And I'm like, I'm having a baby. I'm like, okay, bro.
no, I swear.
Shut down.
Because there is no guidance, you know.
Well, there's no book that
No,
tells
but,
you, you know, yeah.
There's no return policy, no manual. Like I said the other
There's no
day.
refunds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like even at our age, even though we planned it was like we didn't know what we were doing, and it was like we would listen to like I'd listen to my in-laws, and we'd be like my father-in-law, he's awesome. Like, it has to be like this. It has to be like this, do this, and me and my lady be like, we'll go think about it. No, you have to do it like this. And no.
That's what I'm saying. The vocal opinions.
Yeah, and so like I think it takes a lot to go through that, and then the cultural stigma on top of it, right? For men,
Yes.
you know, for me it was a shocker, and now that I see my little girl, I'm like, that's my everything. That's I am here because of her, literally, and for women it must be equally, if not more strenuous, because you're raising a family, and historically the stigma is that you're a woman. You know, you gotta raise your kids. That's your job. The man goes to work. Like, so we're supposed to be working, and y'all supposed to be raising kids. But it
not in
ain't
this economy.
I'm like,
Like,
we're about
we're
that.
not even able to afford machismo.
Yeah.
That's funny. I like that.
That's true.
I like
we
that.
can.
Like, you're trying to do all that. Okay, mantenme. You can't. You really can't.
My wife says to me all the time, when can I retire?
Yeah.
When can I retire? I'm like,
Yeah.
hey.
Yeah,
I'm like,
it's,
They can't.
and I think too that like as you know someone that looks at the world in like a systematic way, it's like, okay, so how is that shift in even technology? I used to be like, oh, like the generations before us, they didn't used to pay attention to these kids, tenían niños like 10, 12, whatever, right? And now I look at, I'm guilty of it too, because I'd be giving these kids an iPad when I don't have the bandwidth for it. But I'm like, oh my gosh, because I knew internally, like, that can't be good, right? And I'm talking like 8 years ago, cuando empezaron los niños a tener el iPad more accessible.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so we're doing the same thing 3 generations ago
Differently,
did.
yeah.
And we had no idea of predicting this technology coming, but it's because we're dealing with a mental health crisis. Like, people having children within this economy, within this like ambiance and everything that's in it, plus raising these kids, and you have to work 2 jobs. There's no such thing as one parent at home anymore. So who has the bandwidth to do all of that while still being a first gen and dealing with all the cultural implications of like, ya te dije que es enough.
And then,
Está pa' llorar.
then you complicate things by throwing in a global pandemic.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
And
yes.
talk about people being isolated and secluded and feeling alone. I mean, it really has changed the societal norms that we're dealing with. Like,
Yeah.
in our region alone, just out here in Southeast LA, we're seeing a tremendous uptake in just the amount of young women that are coming requesting services, but they're coming in with much more severe symptoms.
Yes.
One of the biggest increases that we've seen is in young women with suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts. And the old stigma in mental health was women tend to choose less lethal forms of attempting suicide. That is not the case. I mean, we're seeing these young ladies.
It's a more violent manifestation,
That's-
for sure.
Absolutely. And that's something that's just completely changing the dynamics of what we're having to do.
Well, I mean, just think about how dysregulated we were
Mhm.
for those years.
Yeah.
I think we still are. Still, like,
Absolutely.
we're
Yeah.
coming out, and it's like an entire generation of people, regardless of social status, class, gender, race. Like, we all had a common denominator, but some of us had to keep working through the pandemic, and we were called essential. Like, you know what I mean? Were we like most likely to die or what? You know, like, and we didn't have the luxury of staying in our homes because the stock investments we made 10, 20 years ago could hold us through this. No, we didn't have that.
But it's the same thing even with health delivery. I mean, now I know we have this wonderful stuff of like telehealth and phones and iPads and everything. But the reality is that there's still a population that cannot afford those devices.
Correct.
They can't afford, the data plans to be able to, or to have the private room to go sit down and have their private
Yes.
therapy session. No, these are people who are still in need, but everyone is talking about how great, like the pandemic forced us to become more technology savvy and implement all these,
Yeah.
which is great for a certain population, but for a lot of our community that we serve, it's actually been something that's been an added burden.
Yes.
The
And
resistance to technology with the older population is still very real.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And they fear it. And it's like, ay, no sé cómo pucharle. And it's like, for us, it's like, are you serious? But then it's like, you taught me how to use a spoon. So
Yeah.
let me give you that same empathy and compassion.
Well, it's funny you say that. It's part of like the program that we run. It's part of what we do. Evelyn's been hosting the technology group, and she can share with you. It's a senior technology group.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
initially, I'm a big techie, so initially I think the word technology group scared people, but the seniors just want to know, how do I download? My daughter sent me a picture. Or what's
How
this
can I do
notification? How do I access my bank account? It's very simple things that to us have become common.
Yes.
For to them that is a leap.
Yes.
So like again, from my experience, I remember when my sister bought my mom an iPhone. My mom's like, and bless her soul, she did the best that she could. She couldn't text, but she could call me. I think she had me on speed dial. It was me and my sister. She would call us. She would either call my sister first, and then me, or then me, and then. Long story short, it's difficult. I think it's difficult coming out of that pandemic. Our seniors, like Manny said, not just the seniors, but even communities who still struggle just to have internet.
Yeah.
Even to learn to navigate the internet. These are things that in a way, I always like to think about it like this. So, I worked at a provider before I worked here within the department, and I managed the call center where we took in calls and did intakes and stuff like that. And my outlook then, no sé qué año, like 4 or 5 years ago, my outlook was the system was already fractured.
Yeah.
We could only do so much.
Pre-pandemic was
yes.
already, yes.
In this call center, I had access to the server, and we did maybe like 2,000 calls a day. No te miento, no lie. And it was a staff of 6, so whatever. But my point is that in my head, I was like, the system's already fractured. Once the pandemic hit, it just
Crumbled.
yeah. And so like you have teams like what we have here in Service Area 7, kind of bringing it back to why I came on board to Service Area 7. I wanted to support the community. I wanted to be able to create a unique program or have the ability to be in a unique program that we could provide these services. What we're doing is really different in the sense that we're literally providing just support groups to community members. And believe it or not, that goes a long way in reaching those populations who historically would not, because we don't, we have our badge on, but it's like,
yeah,
I hate
it. But like even the knowledge of like I have to hide it so that they feel more comfortable, so that we could even have this conversation.
Well, again, I talk a lot about my mom, but like my mom used to say, está loco. That is the word. That is the go-to word. So like even for me,
está zafado, le falta like algo tiene, no está muy bien, like that.
So ask Evelyn. Whenever I speak to anybody, I omit the word mental health. I start with the fun stuff. So we have like events here. We had like Dia de los Muertos, things like that, and we provide food, resources, things of that nature. But what I tell the community member is, hey, you want to come to a fun event? We're gonna have food. We're gonna have giveaways. I do not mention anything about services. But when they come here, now they are listening to educational material about supports, about depression, anxiety. And it's helpful for them. And they've actually opened up, right?
Yes, definitely.
They actually enjoy it. So like our approach is kind of sneaky, but I think it's in a good way to
it has to be safe.
Right.
And in order for it to be safe, we have to like overlook or like try to not bring up those things that have placed fear in them.
Correct.
Historically. So badges, even a certain way of speaking, you have to meet them where they're at.
And
I
it's
think
part
a little
of
bit of everything. There's a certain way of speaking, certain way of dressing, meeting the community where they're at. I think that ties back to all of it, because I know previously, before coming into the department, working out in the field within the community, I got yelled at a couple times because I went to a meeting downtown LA and I was dressed up and everything, and then they kicked me out of their house because they were like, "No, tú quién eres? Oh, you're just coming and telling me things and this and that." And I was like, "No, it's me, Evelyn. Like, remember me?" And she's like, "No, it's not you." And I was like, "Yes, it is me." But it was just because I had changed up and stuff, dressed differently, and I wasn't where I had previously met them, where I was at. It was like, and she thought like, you're coming at me like you're trying to be that you're better than
There's
me.
a power imbalance.
Yeah, and it's not. We're the same person. We're here for you. We're here to provide that service to you, to help you.
especially with our community, right?
And we've noticed
we
it a
experience
lot.
this. I always tell people, so like as a professional, I'm a big data person. So you can talk numbers to me all day. I love it. I want to talk technology, but when we're out in the community, they look at you different and you do that. So you have to, like you said, change your language, adapt to the environment where you're in.
Yes.
And so like it's easier for me because like with our community here in Service Area 7, it's primarily Hispanic. So like I relate. So like when I see the community members when we're out handing out food or passing flyers or whatever we're doing, I feel like it's my tia or my tío. It's my cousin, right? So it's easier for me to connect, and I think they feel that like genuinely.
Yes.
But the minute I set up a panel and I expect community members to come in and sit down for a panel, they're gonna walk. They're never gonna show up. They don't, because in their head you're talking down to them.
See.
Right? That's not relatable. Why are you preaching at me? You look like you're 10 years younger than me. Wait,
Absolutely. I mean, I did hospice social work for 3 years. And for those of you who don't know what hospice is, it's when people are at the end of their life. They have about 6 to 12 months per doctor's diagnosis. And they have a team going and providing care in their home. And imagine me walking in as their hospice social worker that's supposed to tell them about life and mental health.
It was great.
And I would every single time have to acknowledge that. Like here I am in the beginning of what you consider my life. And I had to like address that. Like I know that I'm younger, but here's how I can support you through this journey. And it wasn't, so most of the time I ended up working with the family because the patients were not cognizant anymore. But it's crazy how we assume that, right? Because I'm younger, like I have nothing to provide you or no insight or no help. But I remember this one conversation I had with the patient where I show up first day to do my initial assessment and I'm asking her about her life. She was still with it. And she was just telling me that she was from Honduras and that she immigrated. I'm so familiar with that story. And at the end, I think it was a 30-minute conversation, and she's like, es que yo ya estoy cansada, yo nomás quiero cerrar mis ojos, yo quiero cerrar mis ojos. And I finished the sentence because she had already told me she was religious. I'm like, que amanecer con Dios. And she just smiled at me, and she nodded, and then 15 minutes later, I'm saying goodbye to her, and she's like, yo me voy a acordar de usted hasta mi último momento. And I was like, ¿por qué? Like, I felt, warm. And she's like, es que me completaste mi frase. Yo tengo semanas diciendo que quiero cerrar mis ojos, pero no sabía cómo terminarla. Y tienes razón, quiero cerrarlos y amanecer con Dios. And that just left me, like, so fulfilled. Because I'm like, how wild is it that we even judge, like, how our friendships are by the amount of time we've been friends with people. But sometimes it's just a conversation that someone needed, to make sense of whatever they're experiencing. And in this case, it was the end of her life. And I'm over here going through, 26 years old, existential crisis. Who am I? What am I doing?
I forgot my Facebook password.
Yeah, and she's over here giving me fulfillment and an understanding of friendship in a very different way.
Yeah.
And it all ties back to, the human experience and what we consider mental health and how we value relationships. So for me, it's everything that I've experienced. It's expanded me. It's allowed me to connect with literally anyone from any socioeconomic background, race, gender, identity. And I feel almost like I'm cheating at life because I feel like I have a blueprint. I'm like, oh, so this is what's going to happen at this age. So I'm not going to trip. But that's what ended up driving me to create content in the first place, which now I have a platform. Now there's hundreds of people following me. And I wanted to give access to, like, these tools that I know from social work and mental health. Yeah. So using the same technology that some people, and that's why I think the work that you guys are doing is so important, because you're giving access. And now we have people creating content about mental health that relates to our community. So it's like, it's such a nice full circle.
The first in its kind.
Yeah.
When the concept of the podcast came up, not to interrupt you, it was from one of our community members. So we have a like an advisory board for what the peer resource center should be and the programming that we should have. And it was a suggestion that was mentioned to us. And initially, I was the one who was kind of scared. I'm like, I know how to do video editing and I know cameras, but I've never done a podcast. And it was Manny who he was like, no, talk, like you can be in the podcast, right? And I was like, okay. So you can tell in the initial recordings that it was a little here and there, but more the idea was to provide those tools and that support to figure out a way to bring the resources to the community, just like you're saying, because, and I've said it a lot of these things that I did were like, imaginándome a mi tía o mi mamá, like listening to those conversations, right? And sitting there as a kid, because as a kid you're not supposed to say anything. Be quiet, right?
You've been listening to some family cheese that I had no business listening to.
Exactly. But then thinking, how can we talk about this and show the community that things are changing? We're trying to rebrand. We're changing the way we do things here in Service Area 7. Our approach is different. Having you here, for example, having Eddie here, we've had a lot of memorable people here on the podcast, and it's a proud moment. And I think initially, even for me, I wouldn't take ownership of it. I was like, whatever. Gotta shoot the podcast together. Don't want to do it, right? But then it took me a bit, and my wife too, she's like, that's a big deal.
It is.
And so like even what you're doing for our young ladies out there who need a positive role model, who might feel stuck in their community, that's amazing. It's tremendous. If I, when I was a kid, I grew up in the inner city, and I had like a couple mentors, and I had a teacher. He was Cuban, and he would go out of his way to pick me and my cousins up and take us like to the beach or take us to the movies, do things like that. People who I know wouldn't do that.
Yes.
The community members who I know be like, that's your problem. As a matter of fact, the first drum set I ever had was because this teacher loaned it to me. And so, but my point is that we need more people like that. We need our community to become aware of these things. So we used this platform intentionally to provide those resources, to try to give hope to the different cultures, to different people. To make them aware things are changing. We're no longer in the Stone Age. I know at one point things used to happen this way, but they don't need to. Like I always tell my wife, wrong is wrong no matter where it comes from, right? So like, there are certain things that you know, we can work around, Michael, but when something is wrong, it doesn't matter who said it.
Yeah.
It's wrong, and so it's up to us to stop it or make that change, right?
Yeah. Stop making excuses for why you shouldn't address things that are wrong.
There you go.
Got it.
Well, I told you I'm a talker too, but I had a great supervisor way back who said to me, Jaime, you have 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth for a reason. And it took me a while, and it dawned on me, and I was like, oh,
Yes.
I'll listen. Which, you know, again, I shared this last time. Being able to listen is a big part of having a conversation. You know, like something that I'm aware of myself is sometimes it takes me a while to process things. Like, to understand, right? Like, someone can say something to me and it's like, over my head. And then, like, I'm at home with my daughter and I'm like, oh, that's what you meant, right?
Yes.
But I think just being open to those things, like something you said earlier too, like that you kind of felt like you were cheating because you had a plan, like you knew what was coming up. You shouldn't feel that way because it takes for you to be open and accepting of these things.
Yes.
Growth doesn't come just from like growth. You need to be open to listening, to hearing, to growing, to like accepting. Oh, I did that wrong. It's my bad. Owning it, right? And a lot of the times you don't see that ownership. You don't see people taking responsibility for their actions.
It's hard.
Yeah. Like I tell my little girl, mistakes happen, accidents happen. So now, dude, she says all these things back to me. Dad, it's okay. Mistakes happen. And she's so tiny, and I'm like, this kid is like.
Oh my gosh, my son did that to me. I think he was 4. What did I tell him? Oh, at the time I was going through postpartum depression. I had my daughter. I was 23 years old, and I remember I started going to therapy, and then I said, oh, I'll be back, I'm going to therapy. And he's like, what's therapy? I'm like, it's like going to the doctor, but for your emotions. And he's like, oh, okay, so yeah, voy y vengo. And then, I don't know what he did with his toys. I was like, oh yeah, you have to pick it up, ¿sabe qué? And he's like, Mom, you have to be careful, or else you're gonna have to go back to therapy. I'm like, oh, no, you did not, you know? But that kid is too emotionally intelligent. I'm like, yep, I did that.
You know, it's good. I don't know if it's been a similar experience. 'Cause we're all parents here, but like, my daughter's grounded me. Like, you know, and I am so grateful for her, right? Like, initially, like I mentioned, I was scared out of my mind. I didn't know what was gonna happen. But now having her here, I can't imagine not having her.
Yeah.
You know, and it's definitely provided me like a different type of support, right? Like even for my own mental well-being, right? Before, true story, before so I used to play in multiple bands. I'd be out there playing music, whatnot. And I used to be like, I can't wait to go play music. Now I'm just like, I'm gonna chill with my little girl, cool.
Yeah.
What are we gonna do? And right now she's in her singing stage.
Oh, that is so cute.
Yeah, she's cool, but
So she's your daughter?
yeah.
Yeah, because she got the music from you.
Oh, I see. I'm like, yeah.
I feel like that.
You're claiming that part.
No. I mean, I could talk about her all day, but
That's
she's
beautiful.
my little girl. She's super cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's a great thing that it's also been reflected back to you, and I think that's what children do to us. It's a harsh mirror.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I didn't know I had a problem with that.
Well, but you have to be open for
Yes.
that, though. Because it doesn't. I mean, even as like you're talking about being nervous and scared when you first found out you're gonna have a child, that's because you care.
Yes.
There's unfortunately, and I know of close personal friends that don't. It's like, oh yeah, I'm having another baby. Like, just like I'm getting a new pair of pants or something. It's like, that.
I was so like anxious about having children. I'm like, these babies grow up and they become adults and they affect other people. I'm just not gonna bring a bunch of them in here. Like, I was terrified.
Yeah.
But I think it's that awareness that I'm telling you have, you know, and it's something that some of us didn't have parents that were like that, and having to reconcile that as you're parenting someone
But
else.
I think like that's part of it as well. It's like, you know, why it's important to have someone like you here, because I think there is a large portion of our community, a lot of young women that are dealing with that and then some, right?
Yes.
But oftentimes they don't have someone to help them navigate, or they don't have the benefit of getting the experience or hearing from somebody else, or like you were saying, taking this class and kind of learning from it and doing more of an introspective and looking at yourself.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for our youth to kind of hear from someone who's navigated those choppy waters
Yeah.
and done it successfully, right?
Yeah.
Somebody who's, because I think we've all to a certain extent have experienced some sort of trauma. We've had our difficulties, we've had our obstacles, right? That's part of life.
Yeah.
But how you navigate through that and still kind of see that there is that light at the end of the tunnel. Because talking to a lot of youth, unfortunately, they don't see that. All they see is darkness.
There's a lot of pessimism for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, rightfully so. But what's made me strong is having a good support system, and it's been the women in my life, and I think it resonates perfectly with, you know, it being Mental Health Women's History Month and today being International Women's Day. I tell them all the time, like, there's no Gabriela MC without Leti. Leti's my suegra, and we live next door to each other, and she has the youngest daughter. When she was 8 when I came into the family, but now, so she's helping take care of my kids. I help her with her youngest, and we just do that. And at first, it's a slow building pace. Ahorita ya, if I have to go to New York for a conference, like I have my people in place, but it's because we've built this community together. And I think when I thought about starting a business, it was more of like, what do I want to create that's gonna foster community?
Yeah.
And so yes, I opened a cafe, but it was with the intention of like, hopefully people slow down a little bit in their life and then come and have a cup of coffee with a friend. Then I started doing workshops and events at the cafe that created a sense of community, and now it's so big, and I'm so grateful for it, that it's, for me, full circle moment to be here talking about how we connect all these things back to community and mental health advocacy, because that's what I do at my shop.
Which, that's really awesome. I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Well, and it's timely because again, we're in March. It's Women's History Month, but it's also Social Work
It's
Month.
also my birthday month, and I'm a
There
social
we
worker.
go.
Happy
All
birthday,
together.
birthday.
There you go.
I'm like, okay, I was born on Social Work Month. That makes a lot of sense, and it's Women's History Month, period.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really nice just to understand too, like, your own life experiences through that lens. I always like to share them publicly. It's not easy because you're exposing yourself to other people who don't agree, to be very vocal about it. But it's what creates community, and I think having that support is also what allows you to ask for help. And that's huge amongst women because we were told to be calladitas all our life, especially within our culture. So for me, it's stepping stones, and it's like, where's the person at? What's the level of awareness, and how much discomfort are they willing to experience to even get to the advocacy part?
No, and I'm curious, like, how do you think, what would be some of those steps that we could take? Because like you were saying, building that community, right? That was saying that it takes a village, right?
It
So,
does.
but how, like, what would be your words to young ladies that might be watching this, that, like, the steps to take towards building that village? Because many of them are, again, probably like many of us who listen to podcasts, are in our room, on our phone, by ourselves, who don't have those connections. So what are the steps you think would be useful, and even for us as a system, as dealing with mental health, in kind of reducing that stigma and lowering those barriers for the community?
Well, I think recognizing first and foremost that there's a system you're part of that has created these circumstances that you're currently living in, right? And releasing that from you. Like, okay, I didn't choose to be born in this, economic status with this level of, access. Like, we tend to blame ourselves so much for our current lifestyle, for our current circumstances. So, okay, now that I know that I'm part of a system and that the way I was raised and the way my parents thought and all these things, okay, now I have awareness. So now what can I do individually? So releasing the sense of guilt and like self-sabotage. Now what can I do? So I say seek out people that you resonate with. It's the strongest way to start a sense of community. You'll find your people. and if you're listening to the podcast right now, show up in person. Don't underestimate the power of showing up in person, because that's when genuine connections are made. And I knew that like the community I had online, because I talked about certain topics, I knew there was a common denominator of people that followed me. So when I started doing in-person events, I knew the energy in the room was gonna be special. And the people that would show up, they're like, I didn't know anyone that was going, but I was, screw it, I'll go, like I'm gonna show up, and I'm so glad I came. And then they start realizing like, oh, the world isn't as gray, and it's not a doomsday every day, because they start, finding the right people. But it's first and foremost, release that from yourself. And it's like a muscle. I really do tell people, like, even confidence in yourself, like you don't just wake up and I got this. No, like you have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations, and like it's the fear of being in a place of people you don't know, but then you're hoping that this person that put the content out there, the podcast that you guys are doing. So I'm sure people are gonna feel safer coming to this facility after listening to the podcast than if they were to just show up out of nowhere. And it's different levels of access. The podcast can reach a certain population. In-person events can reach this demographic here. If you start putting out written content, books, things like that, it's different levels of access. And I think that's how you build a community over time.
Tell him you should
You
write
need
a
to
book.
write your book.
You need to write a book.
Where is this?
Hey, I said something that struck a chord, so y'all have had this conversation before.
Okay, this is news to me. I don't know about the book. So.
You know what I just realized, and this is so silly, right? Typically at the beginning of the podcast, we introduce each other, and we've gone like for an hour and something without doing introductions. I'm not sure if you all want to do introductions. I think the community knows us by now.
Well, I think we're usually, so they know us. They don't care about us. I think we have
Two guests.
someone that's usually producing in the background,
Yeah.
but now is up front. So.
You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So, I'm Evelyn. I'm with the Department of Mental Health Service Area 7 with the Peer Resource Center. I am very happy to be here on the podcast today. A little shy, but I'm here. But I like just hearing everything that you've done, Gabby, and the stuff that we could provide to the community, reaching out to the community, like you mentioned, in person and stuff. I think that's something really nice that Jaime, and then a lot of our service area partners try to do, is going out there to the community and being able to provide those services in person, because it's a big help to the community. And I think being able to provide all of our services hybrid model, which is online and in person, has been a really good help.
That's awesome. And I think the work that you do is important to even start any type of movement. So starting in the front lines with access to technology is huge. Evelyn is someone I grew up with, as you guys already know, and she reached out for me to come out here. And I'm someone that has come from the community, done the education, done the entrepreneur, written books, podcast, todo lo ya lo hice. So for me, it's huge that I get to come and provide the conversations that need to be heard, across different levels of access. So for me, it's an honor to be here. So thank you for having me.
Cool. You want to introduce yourself?
Oh.
I'm like, who are you?
So my name is Gabriela Cervantez. I'm a daughter of Mexican immigrant parents. That's a huge part of who I am. I graduated from UCLA with a degree in sociology, and then went on to get a master of social work at USC. 6 months into the job, I'm like, I'm not gonna become a millionaire like this. Again, that's really heavy.
What? You
Right?
crazy?
Crazy. So I started listening to podcasts actually. And I started listening to entrepreneurship podcasts, and then I was like, okay, I hear you, but it's different if you're a woman. It's different if you're Latina. It's different if you're raised in the Catholic Church. It's different, like all these things. And I just started creating my own content. So the podcast is the first thing that I put out in 2017. Then I wrote my first book in 2018 about my experience as a first-gen Latina at UCLA. And that opened the doors for public speaking. I started getting paid for that work. I started saving my money, and then I'm like, okay, but I'm getting paid because I'm a good time, I'm funny, I talk to these people, I inspire them, but let's be real, that's not something that you can just like duplicate and have someone else be like, you could do it too, you know, like, o lo traes o no.
Yeah.
And I felt like it's not fair for me to be up here talking about success and all of this if I can't, you know, duplicate it for someone else. So that's why I thought about entrepreneurship, and I opened up a cafe, and now it's back to square one with like building community by having workshops there, and just continuing to put the content out for me is very important, because I know there's a version of me out there that's in the beginning stages of the, oh, I'm not gonna be a millionaire like this.
Of course.
And that's where it starts with
Yeah.
money, right? For a lot of us, it's like, how can I make more money? But it's actually tied to a lot of our cultural experiences, and so there's gotta be a loop there.
So Evelyn apparently didn't tell you that we both have Lamborghinis, right?
Oh, I did not know that.
Oh yeah, county issued Lamborghini.
Oh my god, I apologize for showing up in my Jeep.
$1 million an hour right here. You got it. No, but we're so grateful that you came out. I'm grateful to Evelyn.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
I think this has been an amazing conversation. Everything you shared, again, to me, like when my daughter is old enough to understand, I'll share the podcast with her, because I want her to have like these positive role models, right? And see that, you know, she can do it. Don't fall
Absolutely.
into the stigma.
Yeah.
Don't fall into, you know, the same Latino crush. There's nothing wrong with some of that stuff, but, you know, try to be the best you,
Yes.
whatever that might be, because it's different for everybody, right?
Absolutely.
So definitely try to be the best you, but I'm so grateful that you came out.
Thank you. Thank you
I'm-
for having me.
No, for sure. I'm not sure if there's like a message you'd want to share with any young lady watching this podcast, or just any members of the community. Like, I hate saying your final words, but your a message.
Trust me, they're not the final one.
Right on. Cool.
No, I think it's giving yourself grace as a person. You're a human being trying to, you know, cope with everything that's happening, everything that we discussed today. So be gentle with yourself. You're doing your best. You're doing this for the first time, just like everybody else.
Lovely.
Well, and I'll add to that. I'll add the second part to your question, because I'm curious, probably more so out of my own selfishness, but as somebody like Jaime who's raising a daughter as well, what are your words to fathers?
Oh, yeah.
Like
Ooh,
that.
you had to hit me there.
Well, and it is. It's probably self-serving for myself. But
Hold on.
right,
Well, I think for fathers too, it's forgive yourself, most importantly. There's so much that fathers hold on to in their own experiences of like, this is what I was supposed to have done and I didn't, and they blame themselves a lot for it. So I think releasing that sense of lack of, I didn't do enough, or I could have done this, but you guys come from a generation too of men who were told the same thing. And so forgiving yourself the liberty to start new, even if it feels scary, just to express yourself. Like, trust me, a pat on the back or a smile goes such a long way. Even if mustering up the words would be too much, then show up in a different way.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I'm very grateful. Thank you, Evelyn, for
Yes.
making this
Thank you,
happen.
Evelyn.
Yes, thank you, Evelyn.
But thank you again, Gabriela, for being here. I know that you probably have tons of stuff on your plate, so I appreciate you taking the time
Absolutely.
on this
It's a
Friday and being the international woman that we highlight on this day, which is awesome.
It's
And being
a humbling experience for me. Thank you so much.
And social worker.
yeah, and social worker.
2 in 1.
And vendor. I wouldn't even go
Yes.
there. I wouldn't even go there.
So
But
you're
defi-
gonna sing to close it off?
Huh?
Stop!
You sing?
had to put me on the spot. Well,
What about it?
I grew up in a very musical family, but because of my childhood experiences, I kept away from that for years, and I've processed a lot of what's happened to me through writing. I write books, and I just spill the tea on there, and I'm like, oh, this is what actually, you know. But in the last couple of years, I started playing the guitar again with my daughter by my side, and that has been a healing experience in itself. So all of that has become now songs. I'm actually going to the studio after this to record.
That's awesome. But talk about changing the narrative about something, taking
Yeah, so
feelings. And,
for me, music is such a big part of like how many times don't we hear a song and we start crying or like we get really, because we're so connected, especially with our culture. I'm
Yeah.
not kidding. Pa todo queremos mariachi, banda. Like it's a funeral, there's mariachi. It's a baby shower, there's music. Like it's always there. So for me, it was such a big part of expression. I just never thought I was actually gonna do it with my whole chest. And there's an album I'm producing now, and to me it's crazy because it's regional Mexican music. It's mariachi, it's banda, and I know that what I'm gonna talk about. The lyrics of the songs are gonna stir the pot a little, and that's just starting the conversation. It goes back to meeting people where they're at.
That's awesome. That's
Really
awesome.
cool.
It's terrifying, but
So once you get closer to releasing the album, you gotta let us know. So like that,
You'll come back.
we'll have to have you back. Yeah, so we can.
I'll have
Or
to come
depending
back.
on the content, I'll have to pull it from YouTube. I'm teasing, but
No,
that's so
thank
cool.
you. Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm just blown away by everything you do.
Thank you.
So that's amazing. Thank you for being here again, and thank you for that. I gave a guitar to my daughter recently because I play a little guitar.
Oh, I love that.
So,
that's huge.
Just recently, I took her to Guitar Center to
Mhm.
get you strings and picks, and she picked, of course, the rainbow pack of picks.
Yeah.
And me showing her. So the other day, here we go. The other day, she's like, look that ding 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 ding.
Aw.
That's
Isn't it like the most healing thing?
For me, it's I've been playing music all my life, so for me, it's super cool. I'm not trying to pressure her to do anything.
Yeah.
I just want her to find her own
Exactly.
space, So I think it's really cool.
That's awesome.
But again, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you.
This was
Ustedes.
an amazing conversation,
Absolutely.
and hopefully we can have you back.
God willing, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.